All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. As you know by now, my name is Matt Manning. I'm an attorney here at the law firm Webb, Cason, and Manning. I represent a young man who was tased on Halloween night in Woodsboro, Texas, which is what we're here to discuss today. I'm joined this morning by my good friend and stalwart community advocate, Mr. Jeremy Coleman, who is the president of the H. Boyd Hall chapter of the NAACP. The agenda for this morning is Mr. Coleman is going to start out with some remarks, let you know the NAACP's position, where they are, and then we're going to discuss a few things that I think are imperative for us to truly analyze the gravamen of this case. The first being the historical context in which we find ourselves. And then we're going to discuss a little bit about the facts. I'm going to give you as much as I can give you without violating any juvenile confidentiality laws or in any way imperiling the case as it's continuing to be investigated. Then we'll talk further about information that has been provided by citizens and a call for information from citizens. So with that, we will turn it over to Mr. Coleman.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
So the NAACP and its officers are calling this press conference, and I'm just going to be real clear. We're calling this a hate crime until we get further notification of something different. The state NAACP conference president, Mr. Gary Bledsoe, along with our state executive secretary, they've also been notified of this situation that's occurred in Woodsboro. The NAACP was notified of this on Monday evening by a resident there. We kind of did some research and some verification. I'm just going to share with you briefly just some 3 points, and from that point, Mr. Manning is going to carry it over more in detail. The incident that we're specifically referring to occurred in Woodsboro, and this is what we were provided from the Assistant DA's office, is that the Sheriff's Department took the initial call. From there, it was turned over to the Woodsboro Police Department. And then from that point, the Woodsboro Police Department enlisted the assistance of the Texas Rangers. And so that let NAACP know, one, there is an investigation that is occurring with this situation. We do not know all the details and the facts and the names of the individuals, of course, because Mr. Manning is here as an attorney, and the information we've provided of the ages of the individuals, that information we don't have. Where the NAACP stands on this is if it progresses where there is a continued reporting from the citizens and its members, the next step in conjunction with Mr. Manning and his team will be to present a resolution to our executive committee. And then after presenting that resolution to the executive committee, we will in turn have a meeting with our state office to determine the facts that come as they proceed. Just in research, I'm going to give you some numbers that they just called and share with me right now from the FBI hate crime, which is the Uniform Crime Reporting. So I just want you all to know, the community to know, that the NAACP is saying this is a hate crime until something different comes out. That 61.8% in 2020 of the hate crimes that occurred were based on race. 20% were based on sexual orientation, and 13.3% were based on religion. And then it breaks down on the other. This is information from the FBI in 2020. So it's just important for the Woodsboro city and Refugio County to know that the NAACP locally and on the state level have been notified. And as the events unfold, along with information that we received from Mr. Manning and other individuals, we will come back and give the community that information.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Thank you all for being here. First, as a proviso, as you saw in the press release, we're not going to be providing any information whatsoever regarding the victim that I represent, nor the perpetrators in this case, as all are minors. Accordingly, we want to do our ethical duty and make sure that we follow the Texas Family Code, which prescribes that juveniles in criminal cases have confidentiality as it relates to their records. Notwithstanding that, we're going to give you as much information as we can, just so the community is well apprised as to what happened and what the nature of the allegations are. Also, I don't have a client sitting next to me, as you customarily see in these press releases, or press conferences rather, and that is because I want to make sure that their confidentiality as much as possible is preserved. But with that understanding, I will give you as much information as possible. At this point, I want to direct you to our screen, and what we're going to discuss a little bit is the historical context of the case in which we find ourselves. All right, please. Okay. So as it goes to the historical context, we're talking about the Ku Klux Klan. And as many of you know, surely, the Klan is, quote, the oldest and most infamous of American hate groups, with Black Americans typically having been the Klan's primary targets, but Jews, immigrants, members of the LGBTQ community, and Catholics also being targets of the Klan. The Ku Klux Klan was started in 1865 in Tennessee by 6 former Confederate veterans. Beginning in Reconstruction, which is the period after the Civil War, the Klan has since terrorized, killed, lynched, intimidated, raped, menaced, and all other means of antagonization blacks and other marginalized people, and even whites who have supported black progress and social advancement. The Klan, scholars will tell you, has existed in 3 different eras, beginning right after the Civil War, and in 1925 boasted a believed membership of about 4 million members. So we're talking a substantial organization, and an organization that is comprised of a number of well-educated, well-heeled, influential, highly regarded people. So we're not talking just a secret organization of lower socioeconomic status. We're talking people who are in positions of power. The FBI has noted that in the 1920s, the crimes committed in the name of the Klan's bigoted beliefs were despicable, such as hangings, floggings, mutilations, tarring and featherings, kidnappings, brandings by acid, and along with a new intimidation tactic at that time, cross burnings. The Klan had become a clear threat to public safety and order. In the 1960s, which is what a lot of people are more well acquainted with because it's more recent in time, the Klan perpetrated bombings, murders, and other attacks, taking a great many lives, as the Southern Poverty Law Center has noted. In particular, the Klan is responsible for the bombing and the murder of the 4 innocent little girls in the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, and in the 1964 murders of civil rights workers Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner in Mississippi. Part and parcel with talking about the Klan, though, is lynching overall, and it's important that we talk about what lynching is. Lynching is an extrajudicial form of mob violence where a group of people gets together and says that they're not going to give anybody due process, that there have been allegations, and those allegations are enough to justify taking a person's life. What's incredibly important that I want you all to note is the Equal Justice Initiative, which is headed by Brian Stevenson, the noted scholar and lawyer, published a report called Lynching in America. And most recently in 2017, they supplemented their numbers, documenting over 4,400 instances of racial terror lynchings between Reconstruction and 1950. The reason we know that that is really important is not only 4,400 people lost their lives, but 72% of those, according to the NAACP, are Black Americans that we're talking about. So we're talking a substantial number of people who lost their lives. Now, why did I mention all of the historical context? I mentioned the historical context because when we talk about the Ku Klux Klan, we're talking about a particularly evocative group for Black Americans. We're talking a group that has made its name in terrorizing our people, in menacing and killing and lynching Black people and differently abled people, and our brothers and sisters of the LGBTQ community, and Jews and immigrants. We all know the Klan. The reason that's important is this cannot be analyzed as kids just being kids. It cannot be analyzed as boys just being boys. It must be analyzed as a purposeful, specifically intended crime with the intent of terrorizing young Black people and young people in general. Now, as to the basic facts of this incident, I represent the young person who was actually tased in this case. But we've learned thus far that there are perhaps as many as 6 victims, all of whom are minors, ranging from very young to high school age. Okay, that's important. I want to be unequivocally clear. It is not our understanding that any more than one person has been tased. It's our understanding that those other 5 victims may have been terrorized, chased, otherwise menaced with the taser in this case and by the group. But I represent one victim who was in fact tased by a taser or a taser-like weapon, which we know constitutes aggravated assault under the penal code in the state of Texas, which is a second-degree felony because that is a deadly weapon. Now, 3 young men are believed to have dressed up as these Klan members. They're all believed to be juveniles, which is why we're not providing any identifying information. But we're learning that they may have been part of a larger group of people who were walking together, maybe as many as 10. What's important about this is that this is not just what we've learned through the course of my representation of my client and through investigating the case. This is actually what a number of Woodsboro citizens were posting about on Facebook and social media contemporaneous with it happening. So there were people in the community who saw groups of people walking around, this group of people with at least one taser, and some of whom posted that they were concerned about what was going on. The 3 perpetrators who were involved in the tasing incident are believed to be on the Woodsboro High School football team. And this is very important. There may be at least one video of this event. I do not have this video, but if there's anybody out there that does have it, I beg you, please provide it to law enforcement and provide it to us as soon as possible so that we can preserve that evidence. Now, you may have seen that the Woodsboro ISD yesterday released a press conference, or rather a press release saying that they could not punish these students because it did not occur on school property. Now, I'm never going to accuse somebody of being dishonest, but perhaps they've forgotten their own words in the Woodsboro ISD Student Code of Conduct, which actually prescribes that on the left side, if you look, mandatory placement, misconduct that requires DAEP or alternative school, essentially, placement. A student must be placed in DAEP if they engage in conduct punishable as aggravated robbery or a felony listed under Title V, and in this instance, aggravated assault would be a felony listed under Title V of the Penal Code when the conduct occurs off school property and not at a school-sponsored or school-related event, and one of these 3 things happens, okay? The student receives deferred prosecution. The case is being investigated. That would not have occurred yet. A court or jury finds that the student has engaged in delinquent conduct. The same thing, right? That we're not at that stage yet. But the important part is at the bottom. The superintendent or designee has a reasonable belief that the student engaged in the conduct. Now, the reason that's important is we know Woodsboro is not a large community. We imagine that this information was disseminated very quickly and was provided to administrators, and we know that it was provided to administrators by at least a member of my client's family, providing the information that this had occurred. So I'm not quite sure that that is not something that can happen as a disciplinary measure in this case. On the other side, as it goes to discretionary expulsion, as you see, conduct that occurs in any location may be cause for a student to be expelled. And if you look at the bottom, engaging in conduct that contains the elements of one of the following offenses against another student, which would be applicable in this case, aggravated assault. So with that understanding, we are not quite sure why that is the position of the Woodsboro ISD. I'm sure there are fine people over there who know the law, but their student code of conduct prescribes something completely different than what is in the press release. And for that, we're demanding answers because it's our understanding that the 3 young people who were involved in perpetrating this offense had the opportunity to play in last Friday's football game. And football is a privilege. It is not something that you are afforded by virtue of your right, rather that you go to the school. So it is concerning to us, incredibly concerning, that they would be allowed to play football once the school was aware of their involvement in this heinous incident. If you would, please go to the next. Okay. At this point, we're calling for information. Okay. If you have any information at all regarding this incident, please contact law enforcement. Contact the Texas Rangers who are investigating the case, as you heard Mr. Coleman say. Contact the Woodsboro Police Department. Also, the Refugio County District Attorney's Office will be likely be the office prosecuting this. But also call me or contact my office because I do represent the family and the one victim who was tased, and any information that can be provided to us, we will provide to law enforcement. But we would encourage you to please provide it to law enforcement. And with that, you can take it off the screen there. I do want to commend the citizens of Woodsboro. So many citizens, innumerable citizens, have reached out to me to let me know information that they have and to make sure that that information gets passed on to law enforcement. We're not a law enforcement agency. I'm not investigating this case beyond my representation of my client, which, if you know me, will be voracious, because that is what needs to happen. This young person is a minor, and the reason I am so incensed about this case is because at one point I was their same age, and I was a young black man growing up in America, and the idea that somebody dressed as a Klan member, multiple people dressed as Klan members, could accost me and hurt me when I'm a teenager is indefensible, it's inexcusable, and it's unthinkable. It's an unfathomable thing for a young black person to see this. If you see what's depicted in the media, you and I both know that the Klan is a terrorizing force. So for you to dress up as a Klansman, you have a specific intent of terrorizing. That's not an accident. That's not kids being kids. That's not boys being boys. That's not hazing. That's not high school hijinks. High school hijinks are egging somebody's house, not dressing up as a Klansman and tasing them. With that understanding, we are taking this extremely seriously. And I want to commend my client and my client's family. They have been extraordinarily gracious, far more gracious than they need to be, far more humble, far more focused on moving forward. Thankfully, my client is in good health and is recovering. But the problem with this kind of thing is that we know that this trauma can be lifelong, and this trauma may be lifelong. And the fact that we are sitting in 2020 and talking about 3 young people in a small community dressing up as Klansmen and terrorizing someone and tasing them is beyond me. And it's important that every single person in this community knows that if this kind of thing happens, there are people like Mr. Coleman and myself and all the concerned people in the community, people like the Russells who sit in this very room, who have worked for years to make sure this is a safe community for black, brown, and all other people. We will be watching. We will be watching every single part of this prosecution, of this investigation, and this case as it matriculates through the courts. We have to. If we are going to talk that we're a society that cares about each other, then when we hurt each other, particularly in a way that's specifically intended to hurt someone, we have to call it foul and we have to run it down the same way they did my client. So with that, we'll open it up. We'll allow you guys to ask questions, and we'll give you as much as we can with that respect. Yes, sir.
Question for you. We've heard multiple reports, and I just want to clarify. Were the young men dressed as Klansmen or dressed as ghosts? Because with Klansmen, you have the pointed hood. Ghosts, it could just be a white sheet with 2 holes for eyes.
Right.
Is there any information you can give as far as the clarification of what they were dressed as?
Yeah, I want to be very clear. I was not there, but in everything that I have determined so far, both in talking to citizens and in communicating to law enforcement, they were dressed as Klansmen. They were not dressed as ghosts. I think that is a convenient excuse, and I think that's the easy excuse to say, oh, we're ghosts. We're not dressed as Klansmen. No, you can differentiate the two, and my understanding is they were dressed as Klansmen, not as ghosts.
Definitely.
Have you guys been in contact with law enforcement over there? Obviously, you mentioned that, but
Yes.
kind of where are they at in the investigation? Is
Yeah.
there an investigation?
Yes.
And kind of what are the possible results of this investigation?
So it's a great question. There is an investigation. Law enforcement is doing it. I do want to commend all of the law enforcement. Thankfully, having been a prior prosecutor, as you know, I've had the opportunity to work with a number of them, and I trust them completely. They are all top-notch, and we're lucky to have them working on this case. At least the 2 with whom I have worked before, they are of the highest caliber. One of whom is a Texas Ranger and is working the case. He and I have been in consistent contact. I don't know everything that they're doing. Obviously, I represent the family, so I'm not privy to all of the details that they've developed. But what we have done is consistently provided the information that has been provided to us, to them, in the purpose of aiding their investigation. And the thing that's interesting that a lot of people don't know is the juvenile system is different than the adult system, as you well know. A lot of the focus is on rehabilitation with juveniles. There are times that they can be placed in alternative placements outside of their homes, in lockdown facilities that are not quite jail, but nonetheless don't give them the freedom to go and come as they please. But there are also times where juveniles can be punished very harshly in terms of getting what's called a determinate sentence, which is kind of a hybrid between a sentence when they're a young person and when they become an adult. And there are also probation and other measures that can be implemented in these cases. So there's a wide swath of things that can happen. And of course, the prosecutors are surely going to look at their backgrounds and what they think is appropriate in this case. The issue here, though, as Mr. Coleman very well alluded to, is we're not dealing with kids who just happen to get into a fight. We're not dealing with kids who happen to be engaged in high school hijinks. We're talking a specific act of terror where they are emulating the members of a terrorist organization. So that needs to be given the necessary gravitas, and hopefully the prosecutor will include that in their prosecution of this case. It's necessary. The same way we would look at any other case involving an adult where there was some specific aggravating factor where they evidenced that they intended not only to commit the crime, but to do so in a malicious way. That's what we're dealing with here. And this is not sensationalism. This is facts. These are simple facts. You got the facts about the Klan and the Klan's legacy in the United States of America. If you dress up as a Klansman, you do it with the specific intent of terrorizing your victims, which is what we have here.
What's the status of the victim? How is this person doing physically?
Doing well. Doing very well. As I mentioned, far more gracious and humble than I could ever be at their age. Health-wise, doing well as far as I know at this point. We're in constant contact and trying to continue on with life. As you can imagine, this is a difficult thing, particularly in a small community where people are talking about it all the time, notwithstanding that my client and my client's family are doing very well.
And do you know the race of those who were dressed as a Klansman?
I don't know for sure. I do have some indication about what that may have been, but I don't want to speak out of turn because there are still some things I don't know about the scenario, and I would rather not spread any misinformation. And that's really important for the public to know. We're providing, obviously, what I have culled through my conversation with my clients and in conversation with law enforcement, but they are doing the investigation. There are surely many things that I am not privy to, and I don't want to even disseminate any kind of supposition or guesses on information that I don't have. So I'm not 100% positive of that, with the exception that I do know none of those people dressed up were black, if that helps. So. Yes, sir.
You spoke about the physical injuries and the client continues to recover, but what about the long-term effects and the traumatization that may have occurred? What kind of a recovery process is that going to be like?
That's a good question. I obviously don't want to say anything privileged, and I haven't talked about that really in earnest with my client just yet. But having worked in the system, I will tell you that this is the kind of thing that people might require lifelong counseling for. And really, the important thing is the growth process, or the healing process, to be more precise, may not be linear. What I mean is that my client may go for months or years without having any specific triggering events that put my client back in a sense of terror. But there could be something on the TV screen, there could be a conversation or something that induces that panic and fear that surely my client felt on that evening. So speaking just from myself, and maybe Mr. Coleman can chime in on this, as a young black man, if this occurred to me, I anticipate this is the kind of thing that would keep me up at night for the rest of my life, and that would require counseling and perhaps other intervention to help quell that issue.
Yeah, that's why it's so important. I was just thinking about that, and we've all seen over the past 3 years what's occurred whenever African Americans have been attacked in any way. The ramifications of that, years later, I know even personally, just for myself, there's thoughts of it could have easily been me running down the street and someone assuming that something was and it was not. So I know that as our young black males and females in the community across the nation, even around the world, it's so important that you have some understanding of what it is. It just doesn't stem from this particular incident, as Mr. Manning showed you all on the screen. This is years of emotion, years of the blatant disregard and disrespect that's occurred over years that us as young men may not have experienced with our great parents or family experience. But there's an understanding and there's a certain feeling, and I do know for sure the NAACP will be definitely providing resources if they're needed for that family to help out with them emotionally, even that community. It could be other individuals who were students, and I'm speaking across the board, who may have experienced this. And I shared with Mr. Manning, and I shared with our vice presidents, and I talked with them last night, that this just isn't isolated. You know, this could very much well be where we start to learn about other incidents that have occurred. Maybe not to this magnitude, because right now we're dealing with this. But what we do know is that it's necessary for everyone to understand that this is something that just didn't happen today or 5 years ago. We're talking about years of it.
And Mr. Coleman, how does it make you feel that we're still dealing with violence and racism like this, even today in 2021?
Sure. Well, it's disappointing for sure. I have shared and made no secret about it that whenever you are still encountering situations like this, it kind of makes you think, what is it that you have to do to get across the other side? And it's organizations, specifically the Naacp, who has a historic standing as one of the oldest civil rights organizations, that try and find remedies, not to always just blatantly point the finger,
That's right.
but to say, listen, this is what it is. This is what we're trying to achieve, so that everybody, because it's not just specifically per se African Americans, you know, it's across the board, that at some point we have to realize this is what it is. We need to come up with some kind of plan to coexist, because the reality is, we are a mixed nation. We're a mixed country, we're a mixed state. Woodsboro, Refugio County, it's a mixed city. However, that does not mean that incidents like this can't go unchecked. And that's why I have the confidence, like Mr. Manning said, that his law firm, along with the investigators, are going to do what's necessary to ensure that individuals are held accountable.
And I want to add something to that and say two things. First, prior to the start of this press conference, I was told by a man I trust and look up to highly that in 1978 he was run out of town, black man, run out of town in Louisiana by the Klan. So we're talking within 40 years, 50 years, that kind of thing is still happening, which is why the historical context is so important for people to understand when analyzing this case, number one. But the second thing is, with the historical context, it's not only black people, some white people and others fought for Mr. Coleman and I to be able to sit here without the threat of violence that they had just a few years ago. The fact that I, as a lawyer, can call a press conference and have the news come in and report a young man being run down and tased by people dressed as the Klan is already moving the needle forward. But the point is, we still have need for those kinds of interventions. And as long as I'm here, as long as I'm practicing, I will do everything I can to make sure that anybody who's victimized this way will have justice. As Mr. Coleman, I know, will also work, and as the NAACP has since 1919. Is that correct?
1901.
1901. My apologies. Nonetheless, we want to make sure that everyone knows we stand committed to making sure this young man and all others who were terrorized by this group get justice, period. And the way we do that is by calling it out.
Right.
By letting you know that if this happens, we're going to call you out, and there's going to be pressure. And that pressure is not going to relent until justice comes.
Hidden, trained behavior. That's what they have.
Are there any other questions?
You mentioned there was a video circulating. Have you seen that video?
No, sir. I have not seen that video. It's my understanding that video may have been recorded on the person's private device and then disseminated to others and then maybe deleted from their device. I'm not sure. I know that the authorities are investigating that to see if that video is in existence. But I would call anyone who sees this press conference and anyone who gets this information, if you have that video, please provide it to law enforcement and provide it to me as soon as possible.
Mr. Coleman, will the NAACP be going out to Woodsboro to meet with community and law enforcement?
Yes, that is on the plan to occur in the future. I'm going to coordinate that through the executive committee locally and our state president and then I'll be bringing Mr. Manning and his team in as well, just to be there for us. But that is the plan.
Yes, sir.
Question. To your knowledge, do you know if an event like this or something similar of this state has ever happened in Woodsboro?
That's a good question. I don't know about anything particular to this, but I will tell you what has been communicated to me that I think is both concerning and disconcerting, if you can look at it both ways, is that a number of citizens have indicated that there's a belief that things happen in this community that are swept under the rug, which is why people are encouraged that there is the NAACP and myself and others in the community who are bringing this to light and putting pressure to make sure that this goes the right way. I don't know if anything exactly like this has happened, but the sentiment is things happen all the time or have happened historically that have either no one's been held accountable, or they've been, quote, swept under the rug. And, you know, people make those allegations all the time. I'm not from Woodsboro. I don't have all that information. But I do know that this one's not going to be swept under the rug. And I do know that this one will be made, light for everyone to see precisely what happens. And we're going to hold accountable everyone who's involved in the process. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Did the victim have to seek any emergency medical attention the night of the incident?
I'm not going to speak to that, but I appreciate the question, but I'm not going to speak to that. Anything else? All right, with that, we so appreciate you all joining us and for giving this information to the community so they know what's happening in their community. Thank you, Mr. Coleman, for joining us, and the NAACP for standing with my client and my client's family, and we will give you updates as they arise. Thank you.